Okay, so I know you're looking forward to every day, our time spent together only talking about the Visual Studio IDE. In today's video, we're going to look at features related to topics that we've been discussing for the last hour or so. The tools that have been built into Visual Studio in order to allow us to manage our SQL databases. So we're going to look at something we haven't seen quite yet, called the query window. And then we're also going to take just a few seconds to familiarize ourselves with the Database Explorer as well. All right, so we're going to start off with the built-in tools. Up to this point, when we've been working with data, the only thing that I've really shown you how to do is right-click on a table and select Show Table Data, which is fine, but this isn't really any more than a glorified spreadsheet. What if we want to get a little bit more creative with how we query data out of the database? Well, how we retrieve data, in other words, out of the database. What we can do is just right-click and select New Query. All right, and that opens up a new designer. Now, first of all, we're going to need to select which tables we want involved in this process. And so I'm going to select the Customers table and then select Close. And what we see here is a window in the main area with 4 panes. This one's a little bit crunched up here, and so on is this. So is this one. All right, so the 4 panes, you can see they're off to this left-hand side, and since they're all selected, they're all displayed. Now, typically, I don't keep all of these panes open at the same time. They're just different ways of looking at the same information. At least 3 of them are. So the first one is the diagram pane, and that would show you kind of like what we have with our database diagram a couple videos ago, where we can see the relationships between tables. So I can add, for example, the orders table here. And now you can see that there's a relationship between the two, and so on. Then we have this second pane, which is the criteria pane, a third pane called the show SQL pane. So this is the SQL pane. And so SQL, again, if you recall, it stands for the structured query language. This is the actual code, a lot like C#, but different. It's designed specifically for working with relational databases. It's code that you can write to query or select information out of a database. It goes way beyond that. You're going to see that tomorrow. But as a working definition for today, that's what the structured query language is. A way of retrieving, inserting, updating, deleting data from your database. All of these, the top part here, the show diagram pane and the criteria pane, these are just ways to build this SQL statement without having to write code. I'll come back to that thought in a minute. Finally, the last pane is the results pane. So for example, what if I just wanted to select all of the customers out of our customer table? So I'm just going to do that. Select, in fact, I'm going to remove this table because we don't really need it just yet. All right, so I'm saying give me all columns from the customer table, and I'm implying all rows as well. I'm going to click the little exclamation mark here, and it will show me all rows from my customer table. And I can work with this just like I worked with the show all data designer from 2 videos ago. All right, so for example, what if I only wanted to display the first and last name? Well, then I could just select those 2 columns from my customers table. Notice that it added only those 2 columns, first name and last name, as output. Notice the select statement has changed, and now when I rerun this query, only first and last name are retrieved. All right, so we're starting to get now some sense that you have some control over how you want to bring things back. Let's pick credit limit. Now we want to display all first and last names where the credit limit is greater than a certain value. So we want to put in here is greater than 100. Now notice you see a little filter icon on the credit limit field here in this pane. We already defined it in this criteria pane. Notice that it changed the text of my SQL statement, adding a where clause where credit limit is greater than 100. And when I run this, now you can see I only return back one customer because only one of them has a credit limit greater than 100. Wile E. Coyote has a credit limit equal to 100, if I recall correctly. Okay, so there are some other things I can do. For example, let's go ahead and get rid of this credit limit. I'm just going to select it and hit delete on my keyboard. And here I'm going to sort by last name, descending, sort order 1. I'm going to select the first and last name, but sort by last name descending. So let's see what that brings up. Okay, so in this case, the last name was Coyote, and then last name was Bunny. What if I sort ascending and execute? Now Bunny is brought back first, and Coyote is last. Notice that it also changed, you know, the SQL text, and here I get a different icon, which is a sort icon. All right, so here's what I tend to do. These things get in my way because I know how to write TransactSQL or SQL. I would recommend that you get to that point too. So I'm going to turn that pane off and that pane off. And now we're just working with the query window. Okay, so here I might do something like this, where customer ID equals 2, or 3 rather, and then execute. And you see I can find one row of information. I tell you what, I don't want to go any further than that for now. Hopefully that is enough information, but there are some options in what types of queries you can write. I've only been doing simple select statements, but you can create update statements as well, where you can change the value and set, for example, from first name, I'll change it from Bugs Bunny to Bob Tabor. I may have to put some quotes around these, like so. And now let's execute that. And then let's go back to a select statement and execute that. And now you can see it changed from Bugs Bunny to Bob Tabor. All right. So at any rate, I can create an update statement. I can create a delete statement. So I can delete Bob Tabor's record. Can't delete Bob Tabor's record. Why? 2 videos ago, because we've got a relationship. Can't do that. Okay. But you get the idea, right? I mean, there's different types of statements that we can execute. We'll learn about all of that tomorrow. Okay. But at any rate, so the query window, as we've been looking at here, it gives us a way to create some ad hoc queries, which means one-off queries, or queries that I'll only run one time, that I don't plan on reusing over and over again in my application. The query window gives us some visual helpers to write TransactSQL or SQL code, but I recommend becoming familiar with this window only in so much that you would use it to write the actual structured query language. Don't rely on the helpers. Don't become dependent on it. Instead, you should become self-sufficient writing the SQL yourself. There's going to come a time when there's some SQL statements that are not going to be supported that you'll want to write some using this query window, so you need to get past it and not rely on it. The time you spend learning SQL will have significant payoffs throughout your career. It's one of the most important skills I think you can have as a developer. Okay. So I want to reiterate this too, that I said yesterday. I never do any real serious database work inside the query window myself. Personally, I prefer the SQL Server Management Studio, which we're going to look at, download and install tomorrow, and then use for tomorrow's videos. For now, for today's purposes, this sufficed. Why do I prefer the SQL Server Management Studio? Well, first, the SQL Server Management Studio version of this window is not cluttered with unnecessary panels and so forth. It has IntelliSense. It doesn't try to reformat what I type into the code window, which to me is very, very annoying. And third of all, it's more flexible with the types of queries that you can write, and I kind of alluded to that a moment ago. So at any rate, that's the query window, and you can use it to run one-off queries. Let's go ahead and close that. All right, before we close, I want to take another look at the Server Explorer. Over time, depending on how many applications are looking at your database, the state of the database can change, and that doesn't always reflect in the Database Explorer. So maybe using a different tool, the SQL Server Management Studio, I may have had it open, I may have just went there instead of thinking, oh, I can do that in the Database Explorer. I may have added a table, and and it doesn't just automatically show up here, so I may have to select this button. It's the refresh button, which will refresh, go through the definition of the tables and all the objects in the database, and then try to re-represent them in the folders as displayed here. And you saw when I did that, that little refreshing messages comes up. Okay. Also, if I changed a field definition or column definition rather, it would show that as well. Sometimes that doesn't work. So what I'll have to do is close a database connection and then reopen the connection by clicking refresh. There we go. Okay, and then finally, if I wanted to attach to other databases that I have running, what I can do is just click this Connect to Database icon, and this will allow me to select the type of database, existing database that I want to connect to. I don't want to include the file necessarily in my project. Maybe it's in a central spot on my hard drive or out on the network. What I want to do is simply connect to it. So in this particular case, I'm going to select the third option, Microsoft SQL Server Database File as an example, and select Continue. And here I would either name the file, and I could browse the hard drive for it, or I could change and connect to a server. Not going to show you how to do that yet. If there are credentials that I need to put in order to log in, I can use those here, and I can also test the connection. In this case, I'm not really connected to anything, so I get a no database was specified. So that's a way to manage multiple databases inside of this single Database Explorer window. All right, so I think that pretty much rounds out our coverage of the Visual Studio IDE and the data tools that it supplies. There's a few extra features here and there, but I think you get the main overview from the videos today and this video about how those all operate. Okay, so you know enough about databases now that if I were to throw a diagram at you, I'll bet you could create it. Care to test that theory? Well, in the next video, we're going to do exactly that. It's the homework, and you need to do it, and you need to become proficient at building tables and databases and then querying from them as well. So that'll be the focus of today's homework assignment. See you in the next video. Thank you.